It was the hottest summer in years, and Julie couldn't wait to take a dip in the pool. The community swimming pool had been closed for maintenance for weeks, but now it was finally open. She arrived just before sunset, hoping to get in a few peaceful laps before the evening crowd showed up. The water shimmered under the fading light, reflecting the golden hues of the sky. As Julie walked along the edge, she noticed something odd floating in the middle of the pool, a large, faded yellow life raft. She didn't remember seeing it there before. It bobbed silently on the still water, tethered loosely to the side by a frayed rope. A chill ran down her spine. "Probably left by some kids," she muttered to herself, shaking off the feeling of unease. She dipped her toes into the cool water and slid in, the refreshing sensation soothing her nerves. Julie swam a few laps, but every time she glanced over her shoulder, her eyes were drawn to the raft. It seemed closer. She stopped at the far end of the pool to catch her breath, and as she turned to face the raft again, her heart skipped a beat. It was now directly in front of her, though she hadn't seen it move. The rope was no longer tied to the pool's edge, and the raft floated eerily, just out of reach. "That's weird," Julie whispered, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. She backed away, her arms treading water lightly as she moved to the shallow end. But the raft followed, creeping slowly across the water like a predator stalking its prey. Julie's breathing quickened. She tried to swim faster, but no matter how quickly she moved, the raft seemed to glide effortlessly toward her, its once cheerful yellow color now seeming dull and menacing in the twilight. Suddenly, the pool lights flickered and went out, plunging the area into darkness. The only sound was the soft lapping of the water and her rapid, panicked breaths. She could barely see the outline of the raft, but she could feel its presence, closer than ever before. Then she felt it, a cold, slimy hand brushing against her leg from beneath the water. Julie screamed, kicking frantically, but something grabbed her ankle, pulling her under. She thrashed, her eyes wide in terror as she struggled to break free. The murky water revealed something impossible. A figure, a shadowy, grotesque shape, was emerging from the bottom of the raft, its long arms reaching toward her, its face twisted in a hideous grin. Desperate, Julie broke the surface, gasping for air. She scrambled to the side of the pool, her fingers clawing at the tiles. But as she tried to pull herself out, the raft slammed into her back with unnatural force, knocking her down into the water again. This time, the arms gripped her waist, dragging her toward the center of the pool. "No! Let me go!" she screamed, but the water swallowed her voice. The raft loomed over her, impossibly heavy, pinning her down as if it were alive, as if it wanted to drown her. The last thing she saw before the darkness engulfed her was the sinister face staring back from beneath the raft, its hollow eyes filled with malice. The next morning, the pool was quiet, the water was still, and the life raft floated peacefully in the middle, tethered to the side once again. When the pool attendant arrived for his shift, he noticed something strange. A pair of footprints led from the pool's edge to the water, but there was no sign of Julie. Just the raft, gently bobbing in the water. And under the surface, barely visible in the clear blue depths, a shadow moved. Something waiting for the next swimmer to come close enough. Tom had always been a quiet, level-headed man. His life was uneventful until strange things began happening in his small apartment. At first, it was just whispers in the dark, faint voices calling his name when no one else was around. But soon, the shadows in the corners of his rooms began to move, shifting unnaturally. He could feel cold fingers brush against his skin at night. Terrified, Tom told his friends, his family, even his doctor. But they all dismissed him. "You're stressed, Tom," they said. "You're imagining things." The worst part? The voices started telling him to do things, awful things. But Tom refused. He fought against the madness creeping into his life, desperate to stay in control. His behavior became more erratic as he avoided sleep, trying to escape the horrors that plagued him at night. Eventually, his family became concerned for his mental health. One day, without warning, men in white coats arrived at his door. "We're here to help," they said. Tom pleaded with them, trying to explain the things he saw and heard, but it was no use. No one believed him. He was admitted to the psychiatric ward. The doctors there gave him pills, watched him closely, and smiled sympathetically when he tried to explain the truth. But Tom wasn't insane. He knew that the shadows were real. As the days passed, the entities in his room grew bolder. And now, in the asylum, where no one believed him, they could do whatever they wanted to him. Late at night, as the shadows crept over his bed, and the voices filled his ears once again, Tom realized something horrifying. The asylum wasn't meant to help him. It was a trap, a cage where the unseen horrors could torment him forever, while everyone around him just called him mad. Tom spent his nights in terror. The shadows crept closer, bolder and more horrifying than ever. They toyed with him, staring at him from the corners of the room, whispering in strange, unrecognizable languages. He felt they would soon take him to another world, dark and endless. But every time he screamed or begged the doctors for help, all he received was a higher dose of medication and indifferent stares. The doctors were convinced Tom was suffering from severe hallucinations and needed rest. The drugs, though they quieted him, never erased the terrifying reality of the shadows. In fact, the weaker he became, the stronger and more vivid the shadows appeared. One night, Tom decided he would no longer take his pills. He needed his mind sharp, hoping he might find a way to escape. But with the clarity of his mind came something worse. The shadows took form. No longer were they just dark shapes. Now they were living entities with twisted limbs and eyes that gleamed from the darkness. They approached him, and their whispers became clearer, almost understandable. "Don't run, Tom. You belong to us." Tom had given up on asking for help. He knew no one in this asylum would believe him. But he had to escape before the creatures fully dragged him into their world. At midnight, when everyone was asleep and the hospital was dark, Tom rose from his bed. In the dead silence, among the shifting shadows, he moved toward the door. His heart pounded, expecting the creatures to attack at any moment, but they only watched him, as if enjoying his decision. The asylum doors were locked, but Tom had been planning for days. He had stolen a spare set of keys from one of the guards. As he opened the door, the cold night air hit his face. He stepped out of the building, crossed the courtyard, and entered the forest surrounding the asylum. But even outside the asylum's walls, the shadows followed. Their whispers now filled the entire forest. Tom realized there was no place safe. The asylum was just the beginning. The creatures weren't just inside. They were waiting for him everywhere. 5 days later, a group of asylum staff found Tom in the forest, shivering and terrified. He was mumbling incoherently, his lips moving nonstop, but no one understood what he was saying. They brought him back to the asylum, and this time, even stronger medication couldn't silence his nightmares. Tom sat in the corner of his cell, his eyes fixed on the wall. The shadows were inside him now, and there was no way out. It was a cold, rainy night when Alex, Ben, Claire, and Sophie gathered at Ben's house. They had been friends for years, and while most of their nights were spent watching movies or playing video games, tonight was different. Ben had found something strange while cleaning out his attic, a dusty old board game with no name on the box. The game had simple instructions. Win the game, and your wildest dreams will come true. Lose, and face the consequences. They thought it was a joke. How could a game, no matter how creepy, actually do anything serious? Curious, they set it up on the living room table. The board was strange, with dark markings, unfamiliar symbols, and an eerie glow that seemed to pulse in the dim light. The game came with 4 black game pieces, each shaped like a twisted, distorted figure. Each player had to roll the die to move across the board, but the spaces weren't like those in typical games. Instead of normal prompts like move forward or lose a turn, the spaces had sinister instructions like face your fear, reveal your deepest secret, and offer a sacrifice. They hesitated, but ultimately shrugged it off. How bad could it be? Alex went first. He rolled the dice, landing on a space that read, "Face your fear." The moment his piece landed, the lights flickered, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. The others laughed nervously, but Alex's face went pale. "Did you feel that?" he whispered. Suddenly, a low growl came from the hallway. Alex froze. He had always had a fear of dogs after being attacked as a child. Now, from the shadows of the hall, a pair of glowing eyes appeared, and a massive, snarling black dog emerged. It wasn't just a vision, it was real. The others jumped up in horror, but the game wouldn't let them leave. No matter how hard they tried to pull away from the table, they couldn't move. The dog lunged at Alex, knocking him to the ground. But just as it was about to bite, it vanished, leaving Alex gasping on the floor, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "I'm done," he stammered. "I'm not playing anymore." But the game wasn't done with him. The pieces moved on their own, and the board lit up with the words, "The game is not over until there's a winner." Ben, shaken but determined not to lose, picked up the dice. He rolled and landed on "Reveal your deepest secret." He laughed nervously, but the moment he did, the lights flickered again, and a voice, his own voice, but distorted, boomed from the game. "I betrayed my best friend," the voice said, and Ben's face turned white. "What's it talking about?" Claire asked, eyes wide. Ben tried to explain, but the game cut him off. "I lied to Alex about that fight. It was my fault, and I never told him." Alex stood up, furious. "What is this, some kind of trick?" But Ben's guilty expression said it all. The game had forced him to confess his darkest secret. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that," Ben muttered, but the damage was done. Now it was Claire's turn. She picked up the dice, her hand trembling, and rolled. Her piece landed on "Offer a Sacrifice." "What does that mean?" Sophie whispered. Before anyone could answer, Claire screamed. Her hand, the one that had touched the game piece, was burning as if it had caught fire. She looked down in horror as her skin began to blister and peel away, but there were no flames. Only pain. The others tried to help, but the game wouldn't let them. The words on the board shifted, forming the message, "Sacrifice complete." Just as quickly as it had begun, the burning stopped. Claire's hand was left raw, red and painful, but intact. She slumped in her chair, sobbing, her hand shaking uncontrollably. Sophie was the last to roll. Her piece landed on "Take a Chance." The room grew deathly silent. Everyone held their breath. The board started to glow and the pieces on the table began to rattle. Then, slowly, a card emerged from the center of the board. Sophie reached for it, her fingers trembling. It read, "Choose wisely, one must leave." "What does that mean?" Sophie asked, looking up in terror. Before anyone could respond, the room grew colder, and a voice, deep, dark, and otherworldly, spoke from nowhere. "One of you must leave this world. Decide, or the game will decide for you." Panic set in. This is insane," Alex shouted. "We're not choosing anyone." But the game had already begun its final move. The pieces started moving on their own, spinning wildly across the board. The lights flickered once more, and the walls of the room seemed to close in. Suddenly, Sophie screamed as the floor beneath her chair cracked open. Hands, dark, clawed, and twisted, reached up from the darkness below, grabbing her legs and pulling her downward. The others tried to grab her, but it was too late. Sophie's terrified screams echoed through the room as the darkness swallowed her whole, and the crack sealed shut as if nothing had ever happened. The game pieces stopped moving. The board went dark and everything fell silent. Alex, Ben, and Claire sat frozen, staring at the spot where Sophie had disappeared. The game's final message appeared on the board: "Game over." They were free to leave now, but Sophie was gone, forever. As they stumbled out of the house, too shaken to speak, they knew they had barely survived. The game, though, remained behind, waiting for the next players to make their move. And somewhere in the darkness, Sophie's screams still echo, trapped in the game that no one should ever play.